Welcome to ILTV's Weekly Insider. I'm Steve Leibowitz. We have now passed the 1-month mark since Israel declared war on Hamas following its rampage into Israel, murdering some 1,400 men, women, and children while taking about 240 others hostage. The entire nation, every one of us, suffered trauma on October 7th, the deep trauma of having collectively experienced, as a people, the worst tragedy in national history. We are in mourning, and we are still deeply in pain. At least 200,000 residents of the Gaza and Lebanese border have taken shelter, refugees in their own land. We are recovering quickly from October 7th. The nation is united now more than any time I can remember in my nearly 50 years in this country. And the IDF, well, let's just say their exploits and stories of heroism will become the legends of future generations. Joining me here in the studio is Alon Tal, former Knesset member and a close confidant of Minister and National Unity Party leader Benny Gantz, and on Zoom from Jerusalem, Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. I feel as though I have a real war cabinet right here with us today. Dan, let me start with you. We were all taken by surprise on October 7th. Are you surprised at where we are at a month later with IDF forces deep inside Gaza on the one hand, but with Hamas still hanging around and still firing rockets into Israel?
Steve, we are on November 7th, and I would argue that October the 7th continues. This is a strategic attack by the Islamic Republic of Iran, using its Hamas proxy, using its Hezbollah proxy in the north, and mobilizing its Houthi proxy in Yemen. It is extremely important to understand that this global jihad, which is the term that is being used by the Hamas, that has been used for the last 44 years by the Islamic Republic of Iran and its IRGC terror arm, is the strategic program to destroy the great Satan, which is the United States, and the little Satan, which in the view of the Iranian mullahs is Israel. And it is very important to understand this is not a war against Israel per se. It is a war against the West. It is a war against the values of freedom, democracy, and liberty. And Israel happens to be on the front lines of those principles and values, having suffered the worst mass murder in Israel in the last 2,000 years since the fall of the Second Temple, and the worst mass murder of Jews, including toddlers, women, and men and soldiers since the Holocaust. So we are definitely the canary in the coal mine, but now the coal mine has become an international jihad. I am not surprised that we are still fighting. I presume that this war will continue as assessments have been made by the National Emergency Government for the coming months and even longer.
All right, well, Alon, Dan gave us a good picture of the overall picture here in the Middle East, but I want to take it specifically to Gaza. We've been hearing consistently from our leaders since the opening days of the war that we have no choice but to end Hamas rule in Gaza. Are we on track to getting that job done?
Well, the reports that I'm getting back from Gaza suggest that the IDF is actually making progress beyond their expectations. Of course, Israel has no choice. To not finish the job and topple and throw out the Hamas leadership means that we actually are going to concede sovereignty on the Western Negev. There are 200,000 internal refugees, just like you said, who can't go home. It's unimaginable that we would allow that situation to last any day longer than it has to. My daughter's working in Jerusalem with 50,000 refugees who came basically with the shirts on their back, and they're trying to get them in schools. It's not a solution. So Israel has no choice. We have to do it. I think we can be extremely impressed with the efficacy, the intelligence, and the humanity of the Israeli army, which is doing such a terrific job in trying to defeat a terror organization which would prefer that its own citizens die rather than get them out of harm's way. And still, we're managing to make tremendous progress, and we have to salute those very, very brave soldiers that are doing the job.
All right, Dan, let me turn back to you. So Alon is presenting a picture which says, effectively, the IDF is on track, on schedule, is going to eliminate Hamas. But let me present another possibility. With all good intentions, and even with ample motivation, what if it's not possible to actually end Hamas presence as we hope? Those underground tunnels are different than rolling tanks through rubble. Is it doable?
Steve, the Israeli army is well aware for many, many years about the tunnel technology that is Iranian regime tunnel technology. We know there have been Iranian agents in the tunnels for the past 10 years. And this is not the first round of hostilities that the Hamas, now we call them ISIS Hamas, but the Hamas is forced upon Israel. The IDF, the Israeli government, Israeli security services know very well about these tunnels and how to destroy them. I would say confidently, I think, continuing former member Knesset Tal's assessment that Israel will destroy the Hamas leadership, not only end their capabilities, as Israeli spokesmen have said, but we will destroy the Hamas leadership. The Hamas, of course, is the local branch of the International Muslim Brotherhood. Those that have said that Hamas is an idea, I would disagree with. That if Israel shows overwhelming force, of course, in total compliance with international law, as Israel has always complied with international law, we will send an echo effect not only to Hamas, but we are already sending that effect to Hezbollah and the Iranian regime. The only choice is overwhelming victory. And I believe that from everything that I've heard, and the assessments are that Israel is working only for overwhelming victory against this savage Hamas terror organization.
All right, Alon, let me turn to you. I've been covering the war in Gaza now for 32 straight days. 12 days ago, our troops entered Gaza with the start of the ground maneuver. Gaza City has been cut off. It's been encircled. We're trying to control the ground above before we go into the ground below. But they're fighting a guerrilla warfare. They're still capable as a fighting force, the terrorists are. Where do you think we're going to be at a month from today?
Well, I think that we all suffer from sort of a simplistic notion that all we have to do is get to the Sheba hospital under which supposedly the Hamas leadership is huddling, and if we can conquer that in some sort of a capture the flag metaphor, we'll end up being able to. It's not that simple. This morning there was reports that in fact the Hamas leadership moves every single night within this tremendous network of tunnels.
Miles and miles of network.
And they're moving around because they recognize.
It could be hundreds of miles.
Nonetheless, we can already see that there is a reduction in the number of rockets, and you could almost, if that's some sort of an indicator of their capabilities. And at some point, this overwhelming force that is actually manifesting itself now is going to break their spirits. Now, we know that the Hamas fighters are very, very happy to be suicide jihadists, and that's part of the challenge that we have. This is not a rational fighting force. These are people who are almost seeking that privilege of dying. But I do believe that sooner than later, we're going to come in there, and maybe we won't control every single tunnel. The job is complicated, particularly because of the hostages. Those same tunnels contain 240 innocent people that we have to try to get
Although
out.
the one that was rescued was actually from a home, so we don't know where it's going to happen.
And it seems like they're spread all over, so we can't generalize. But this makes it somewhat more complicated. But what we see is that already the Gaza City has been cut off from the rest of it, and they are closing the noose. And so I'm very, very pleased about that progress.
They're closing the noose. And Dan, let me turn to you. The Prime Minister told ABC News overnight that the IDF may need to remain in Gaza for an infinite period. How long do you see it lasting?
Well, infinite is a very big number. It reminds me when we were in high school and we used to use the word Googleplex, which means, infinite expressed expressed without limit. It is clear that the IDF will have to administer for some months the daily life in Gaza, unless there is some sort of an international force.
You don't mean Dan, you don't mean the daily life. You mean a security control. No, we're not. We don't want to run their schools and we don't want to come back and be the occupying power on the ground and reestablishing a military government there.
First of all, I would not use the term occupying power because that term has been misused and abused by people on our side and other side. There is no occupation because Gaza is not a sovereign piece of territory. However, the Israeli army, as we did before the Gaza Jericho agreement back in 1994, was the administering power in Gaza, and the issue is going to be that that what must be avoided at all costs is restoring the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, the Palestinian Authority that spends 60% of its budget financing the Hamas-controlled Gaza, the Palestinian Authority that is responsible for incitement to murder in extraordinary anti-Semitic themes of Soviet and Nazi discourse. They cannot be the administering power in Gaza. The only choice in the midterm, is for Israel to be the de facto, what they call the de facto sovereign in Gaza until such time that either an international protectorate or a federal relationship together with Egypt can be cobbled together, and therefore allow the people of Gaza to run their lives in dignity as a reconstruction fund is put together, and Gaza can become the truly great society that it could become once this savage Hamas group is gone.
All right, Alon, you want to respond?
I respectfully disagree. I am no great lover of the present Palestinian Authority government, and I recognize all the problems of Abu Mazen, who is old and still somewhat of a Holocaust denier. But the fact of the matter is that the only institution with the capability, with the infrastructure to administer is the Palestinian Authority. I'm not just saying this. I think that there's a consensus among military leaders that we have to pass this over to somebody. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't end up overseeing the security area. So I envision something like we have Area B today in the West Bank, where the administrative functions, the governmental functions will be passed over to the Palestinian Authority, but the IDF will have full access to impose its will when needed to be to protect our security interests. But I have no interest in returning to a situation of occupation because at the end of the day, we have to be looking beyond this. And we now face, I think, to our good fortune, a new Middle East to the extent that we have moderate partners, and we just have to rely on Secretary of State Blinken and Biden to twist enough arms to get the moderate Arab armies to come in and be part of the solution at the end. But surely we don't want to put an indefinite amount of time. I think that would be a terrible mistake, and in the end put us in an intolerable position from a security perspective.
All right, Dan, let me follow up on that.
Allow me just to follow up.
Dan, you'll be able to answer, I'm sure, whatever you want to say, but I do want to say this to you, Dan. Prime Minister Netanyahu has built a small coalition of support, international support I'm talking about, from the United States. And it's still, he's opposed to a ceasefire. The United States supports Israel's right to self-defense and hopefully defeat Hamas. But they're also under tremendous pressure from Arab and Muslim countries and even Western allies for humanitarian pause. How long do we have to fight this war?
Steve, a humanitarian pause would only be a pause to allow the Hamas to bolster its position, strengthen and further cause its own public to suffer and gain all of the assets that it needs in order to start attacking Israel again. The concept of a humanitarian pause is directed only at Israel, not at the controlling Hamas army in the Gaza Strip. But I want to make one very important point. Let's not think like Israelis or Westerners. Let's think like Palestinian leadership or those in the Arab world. You remember what happened, Alon, in 2007 when the Hamas were throwing PA people off of roofs. If we think that Abu Mazen or Dahlan or Faraj or any of these guys are going to go into Gaza and be considered anything else than marionettes of the Israeli government and be thrown off of roofs within 10 minutes or hanged off of the central square, we're kidding ourselves. That's the reason that Mahmoud Abbas canceled the whole Jordan summit about 2 weeks ago, is because he has no interest in going to Gaza. following Israel's counter-terror
I think
operation
Mahmoud
there.
Abbas,
So we have to be very...
he canceled his participation because of the fake news with regarding the hospital. I agree with you 100%. The longer we delay a resolution of the situation and a total defeat of Hamas, we are, in fact, imposing some sort of a humanitarian disaster in Gaza. The best thing we can do for the Gazans is to finish the job as expeditiously as possible.
All right, I just hope that our leaders in the room, Benny Gantz and Prime Minister Netanyahu, have a plan moving forward. But Alon, I wanted to ask you this. There are now about 200,000 residents of the Gaza periphery and the northern border that have been evacuated from their homes. Entire communities, effectively refugees. What's going to be with them? It's been more than a month. How long will these people have to be away from home?
Well, just yesterday I was visiting a friend of mine. I grew up in North Carolina, and Avram Dworsky from Kibbutz Alumim is one of the 200,000, so I went to visit him in Netanya. And I asked him, how many of the people in your kibbutz are going to be willing to go back after having experienced the trauma? And he said many young families, and Alumim was not as affected as dramatically as a place like Kibbutz Be'eri or Kfar Aza. And he said, yes, many young families are going to want to wait 3 or 4 years to make sure that...
3 or 4 years?
He said, before they can be absolutely certain. He said that they can go back and be safe. So although there's a very, very encouraging movement of young people who want to go back to the Gaza envelope and reestablish the kibbutzim, almost a sort of a new Zionism in the old style of the 20th
Well, that takes
century.
me in right to the next question.
But I'm not sure what the answer is, because we have to make sure that we neutralize the Hamas threat. Then we can offer these 200,000 people maybe a new life.
All right, Dan, let me turn to you. The three of us are all immigrants from the U.S. We hear reports of growing anti-Semitism. I used to think that there was a bit of hype involved, maybe for Jewish fundraising, but not this time. The reports from campuses are really, really scary. There was even an elderly Jew at a protest in L.A. that was murdered. But let's look at the positive. This war could potentially be a great motivation for Aliyah from the U.S. and from the West. I know that post-67 and post-73, there was a big boost. I was one of them after 73. What do you think?
I think it's an important suggestion you make, Steve. I think it very well may be a boost for Aliyah. I remember the boost for Aliyah after 67 was a result of a positive impulse because of Israel's miraculous and lightning victory over 4 Arab states in a matter of 6 days. Here we have a very, very serious development, which the Hamas has helped us understand in a moment of moral clarity, which is that we are facing a global jihad. People in the West, in major cities across the United States, Canada, and in London and other European cities, had once called this anti-Israel criticism. They now understand that the Hamas has helped us understand that it is a global jihad. And the genocidal anti-Semitism, as you're seeing on the screen now, that calls for the mass murder of Jews in Israel and out of Israel, is a function of genocidal anti-Semitism that is sweeping across the West. It is unfathomable after the worst massacre, in 400 years, that you would see people ripping off, as you see on your screen now, the photographs of children that have been kidnapped by the ISIS-Hamas organization. But that is what is happening, and it is a reason for deep concern. And it very well may be the latest major trigger for Aliyah to the state of Israel, and that would be a good thing.
I'm not so sure that at the end of the day, and that many Americans or Europeans are going to come up and pack up their things and come. And indeed, the Aliyah that came after the Six-Day War was a fairly small percentage of crazy idealists like the three of us. But the truth of the matter is that I think that this is a moment of clarity, and I agree with Dan, that anybody with even just a thimble of perspective has to think about, well, tell me who your friends are, and I'll tell you who you are. And to see the liberal, progressive left line up alongside Putin and Iran and Islamic ISIS kind of organizations, I think eventually they're going to realize that they have been actually duped and drank some kind of Kool-Aid along the way. So I'm very hopeful that in the
Somebody
end,
has suggested that those people that are attending the protests, the progressive left-wingers, should be awarded by getting to spend a month in Gaza, perhaps.
Sure, and we all, for those of you who haven't seen the Eretz Nehederet sketch, which I hope will go viral, they talk just about the tremendous hypocrisy and stupidity of that position.
Before we're out of time, let me ask you this. Is there any point in arguing Hasbara? Because either people are pro-Israel or they're against us at this point. Either they hate us, the Jews, no matter what we do, or they love us because we are, the Jewish nation.
I think that from what I hear from friends, and particularly from young people in the United States at least, they are desperate for information. When Israel says we are making every effort to avoid civilian life, they want specifics. They do want to stand up for Israel, and they don't necessarily have the detailed information. So I've been very in touch with Minister Gantz just on this issue, but we have to reach out, especially for those young people, Jewish or non, supporters of Israel who are on the front lines of campuses, and give them the kind of tools they need to stand up to the disinformation that they're facing in what is, I think, just a very, very cynical and very unfortunate kind of attack on Israel's right to exist.
Dan, we're almost out of time, but I have to ask you. You're one of the top experts in the country in Hasbara. You always have the right points to make that are convincing and effective, especially about the security of the country. Are we going to win the Hasbara battle? How are our government spokesmen doing?
Steve, I think that Alon Tal is dead on message on this point, and I'd like to basically join him is to say disinformation is the name of the game. We are no longer in a war of public diplomacy, public relations, or as we say in Israel, Hasbara, which means explaining. We are in cognitive warfare. We are in the type of warfare that the Soviets, the Chinese, and the Islamists have been using for decades and centuries. And it is time that Israel understand that it needs to have 200 people in the National Security Council online 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, fighting the information war against, and what Alon said is absolutely right. It is disinformation. We need to educate our young people. They don't know the history of Israel. They don't know that there was never a country called Palestine. And for the first time, they're beginning, in my own family, has begun to say we need more education. We need basic facts about Israel. So we are fighting a war against disinformation, but we have to supply the right information.
All right, we're just out of time, guys, but let me say that the two of you should be at the top of the list of those explaining Israel to the people that need to know. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you to Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs via Zoom. And here in the studio, thanks Alon Tal, former Knesset member, for being with us. I'm Steve Leibowitz. This was ILTV's Insider. For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at iltv.tv. Thanks for watching. Let's win the war and bring them home. Stay safe, and shalom from Israel.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple.